It is the Zodiac Snake type that debuted in Medarot R, finally making her grand debut. It is MDZ00 Meduzard, with a kit of Freeze, Sword, Counter Guard, Multi-Legs, and the leg ability of P-Loader, which buffs success to melee skills relative to your Metaforce gauge. Now, it is honestly nice to see yet another returnee from the days of Medarot R come back with completely rehashed art and a model on top of that. Across the board, she also is going to be sporting a very handy melee kit, meaning she's going to be a very highly sought after model right from the start. Freeze, of course, is an ailment-based skill that will stop enemies cold on the field and allow the next incoming hit to be guaranteed to land and guaranteed to be a critical hit on top of that. Basic Sword, of course, is an overall balanced melee skill that you can generally never go wrong with for its incredible balance. And then, of course, Counter Guard, which is a defense-based skill that will intercept a melee-based attack from the enemy side and reflect the damage back to sender. But of course, that only applies to melee attacks exclusively in this case. With multi-legs, she does have overall pretty good coverage, arguably the next best under biped in many cases, at the cost of not being as fast more or less, but the leg ability of P-Loader does essentially tie into it pretty well, as with the right metal nature, say for instance Hunter or Sniper, or even if you choose to use Guard nature if you want to capitalize on the shield more. With the Metaforce charge, she can actually buff her success up relatively high, which will very easily tie into her head uses or her basic sword for even more damage or likelihood of landing attacks, and even less likelihood of the opponents dodging outright or grazing attacks, especially in this case with a freeze head, which is going to be her main source of stopping enemies to help guarantee that every hit that lands is going to be one that counts. As a pure set score across the board, I would honestly rate her a pretty solid 6.5 out of 10 for her pretty overall conventional balance across the build for conventional melee. And of course, Freeze is an open addition on any build that is in need of a stop or paralyze ailment, the only major weakness to this being anyone that is of course using Stat Cleanse. Right arm of Sword, as mentioned, is something you can generally never go wrong with and will fit very easily in any particular team, females especially, that is in need of a conventional melee skill with no major drawback or advantage. And Counter Guard is probably going to be the more niche of her skills, more or less, as it's going to be kind of tricky to make use of that effectively, but in the few senses where you can use it feasibly, Meduzard can definitely capitalize on making use of it and punish a lot of conventional or even dedicated melee fighters on the opposing side by reflecting that melee damage back to sender. As mixed parts, on the other hand, I would honestly rate Meduzard a pretty solid 7 out of 10 across the board for her, again, for her overall balance. Freeze and Sword you can use just about anywhere, so you're not going to have any major disadvantage or punished essentially for having either on the team. And even if, say, the opponent does end up using Stat Cleanse, you can still technically rely on Freeze for some minor auxiliary damage more than anything else, but it's going to be primarily the Sword where you want a lot of your damage to capitalize from. And then, of course, the leg ability of P-Loader will honestly tie into and emphasize the use of melee-based fighters, but this does honestly tie into Meduzard's kit very nicely, and with the right metal nature, you can make this even better for her, as the fact that essentially after a certain number of hits, every hit is more or less guaranteed to land after you make a certain number of Metaforce charge to help further bolster her success ratings across the board.